pastor is unjustly sentenced to death. Hours before his execution, he cried out to God and an incredible miracle brought him to tears. The morning sun cast golden rays through the stained glass windows of Grace Baptist Church, painting the wooden pews in a kaleidoscope of colors. Pastor Michael Thompson stood at his desk, adjusting his tie as he reviewed his sermon notes one final time. At 45 years old, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that carried the wisdom of someone who had devoted his life to serving others, Michael had become a pillar of strength in the small town of Cedar Springs, Texas. "Morning, Pastor Mike," Emily Collins's cheerful voice echoed through the church office. The 23-year-old youth coordinator bounded in, her arms full of files, and her enthusiasm infectious as always. "I've got the updated proposals for the youth outreach program." Michael smiled warmly. Emily had joined the church staff 2 years ago, fresh out of college with a heart for community service. Since then, she had revolutionized their youth ministry, creating programs that reached far beyond the church walls into the poorest areas of Cedar Springs. "Let's take a look," he said, clearing space on his desk. As they reviewed the proposals, Emily's passion for her work shone through. She had uncovered disturbing trends of drug use among local teens and was determined to make a difference. "These kids need hope, Pastor Mike," she said, her blue eyes intense. "And I think I'm close to identifying the source of the drugs. If we can cut that off," a knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Thompson, Michael's 26-year-old daughter, stood in the doorway, her business suit and briefcase a stark contrast to the casual atmosphere of the church office. "Dad, got a minute?" "Of course, sweetheart." Michael turned to Emily. "We'll continue this discussion later." Emily nodded, gathering her materials. "I'll have the full report ready by tomorrow's board meeting." As she left, she squeezed Sarah's arm affectionately. The two young women had grown close over the past year, with Emily often seeking Sarah's legal advice for the youth program. Sarah closed the door behind Emily, her expression a mixture of excitement and exhaustion. "Just wanted to let you know I passed the bar exam results," she announced, a small smile playing at her lips. Michael's face lit up as he embraced his daughter. "That's wonderful news. Your mother will be thrilled. Speaking of which, have you told her yet?" "Not yet. I came straight here from the courthouse." Sarah's smile widened. "How is she feeling?" "Better now that the morning sickness has passed." Michael's eyes softened at the thought of his wife. At 43, Jenna's pregnancy with twins had been unexpected, but they had embraced it as a blessing. "Though she's already reorganizing the nursery for the 3rd time this week." Sarah laughed, the sound carrying the same musical quality as her mother's. "That sounds like Mum. I'll stop by the house later to share the news and help her rearrange everything again." Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. James Warren, one of Cedar Springs' most prominent businessmen and chairman of the church board, entered without waiting for a response. Tall and imposing in his expensive suit, Warren carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power. "Michael, Sarah," he acknowledged them with a nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I needed to discuss the upcoming board meeting. Emily's proposals are causing some concern among certain members." Michael straightened, sensing the underlying tension. "What kind of concerns, James?" "Her investigations into the local drug trade are becoming rather intrusive. Some feel she's overstepping her role as youth coordinator." Warren's tone was measured, but his eyes held a warning. Sarah stepped forward, her legal training evident in her stance. "The youth program operates within clear legal boundaries, Mr. Warren. Emily's work is helping identify at-risk kids and get them the support they need." Warren's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, we're all proud of Emily's dedication. I merely suggest a more conservative approach might be wise." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and congratulations on passing the bar, Sarah. Your father must be very proud." After Warren left, an uncomfortable silence filled the office. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a habit when he was troubled. Something's not right with him lately. He's been pushing back against every new initiative Emily proposes. "Dad, be careful," Sarah warned. "Warren has a lot of influence in this town. If Emily's investigations are making him nervous..." She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. Michael squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Don't worry about me. Go share your news with your mother. We'll celebrate as a family." Tonight. Later that evening, the Thompsons gathered around their dining room table. Jenna, her pregnancy showing at 5 months, had prepared Michael's favorite pot roast. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled as Sarah recounted her bar exam experience. "To our daughter, the lawyer," Michael raised his glass of water, matching his wife's alcohol-free toast. May you always fight for what's right. Jenna reached across the table to hold her daughter's hand. Your father and I are so proud of you, sweetheart. And soon you'll have 2 little siblings looking up to their successful big sister. The moment was interrupted by Michael's phone buzzing. A text from Emily. Need to talk, important. Can we meet after tomorrow's board meeting? Michael typed a quick affirmative response, trying to shake off a sudden sense of unease. He looked around at his family, his pregnant wife glowing with happiness, his daughter embarking on her career, the promise of new life on the way, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. But as the evening wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful life was balanced on the edge of a precipice. Emily's investigations, Warren's warnings, and the undercurrent of tension in the community all seemed to be converging towards something ominous. When Sarah left that night, Michael stood on the porch watching her drive away. Jenna wrapped her arms around him from behind, her pregnant belly pressing against his back. "Something's troubling you," she said softly. Michael turned to face his wife, drawing strength from her steady presence. "Just thinking about Emily's work with the youth program, I feel like she's uncovered something bigger than she realizes, and I'm worried about her." Jenna studied his face in the porch light. "Then we'll support her like we always do. That's what this family's about, standing up for what's right no matter the cost." Michael kissed her forehead, his hand resting gently on her belly where their twins grew. "You're right, as always. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." As they headed inside, the Texas night settled around their home, crickets chirping their evening sermon. Everything seemed peaceful, but beneath the surface, forces were already in motion that would soon shatter their world forever. The autumn evening settled over Cedar Springs like a heavy blanket, bringing with it an unseasonable chill. The church board meeting had run later than usual, tensions simmering beneath polite smiles, as Emily Collins presented her findings on the local drug crisis. Michael Thompson watched with growing concern as James Warren repeatedly challenged her data, his typically smooth demeanor showing cracks of barely contained anger. "This meeting is adjourned," Warren announced abruptly, cutting Emily off mid-sentence. "We'll continue this discussion next week after we've had time to review the documentation more thoroughly." As the board members filed out, Emily caught Michael's eye, subtly nodding toward his office. He remembered her text from the previous night and followed her, closing the door behind them. "Pastor Mike," Emily's voice trembled slightly, her usual confidence replaced by evident fear. "I found something big." She pulled out a USB drive from her bag. The drug trade isn't just some small-time operation. It's organized, and it's being run through legitimate businesses in town. Michael leaned forward, his stomach tightening. "What kind of businesses?" "Warren Enterprises," Emily whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "I have financial records, shipping manifests, everything. They're using the youth center renovation project to move drugs through construction materials." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Warren Enterprises was the largest employer in Cedar Springs, and James Warren had been a church pillar for 3 decades. "Emily, these are serious accusations. We need to be absolutely certain." "I am certain," she insisted, pushing the drive across his desk. "Take it. Look at the evidence yourself. I'm meeting with Detective Martinez tomorrow morning to hand over copies of everything." A knock on the door made them both jump. "Michael?" Warren's voice carried through the wood. "A word before you leave?" Emily quickly grabbed her bag. "I'll use the side door. Please be careful." She slipped out just as Warren entered through the main office door. "Was that Emily leaving?" Warren asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Yes, just finalizing some youth program details," Michael replied, discreetly sliding the USB drive into his pocket. "What can I help you with, James?" Warren closed the door, his demeanor shifting. "Michael, we've known each other for years. I consider you a friend. That's why I'm warning you. Emily's crusade needs to stop. She's young, idealistic, but she's going to hurt a lot of people if she continues down this path. She's doing God's work, James, helping troubled youth, fighting against drugs in our community." "Is she?" Warren stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Or is she creating problems where none exist, stirring up trouble that could damage the church's reputation?" Think about your position, Michael. Think about your family, Jenna's pregnancy, Sarah's new career. It would be a shame if anything disrupted all that. The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. Michael stood, drawing himself to his full height. "Are you threatening my family, James?" Warren's smile was cold. "Of course not. Just offering friendly advice. Good night, Michael." After Warren left, Michael sat heavily in his chair, the USB drive feeling like a lead weight in his pocket. He called Emily's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. "Emily, it's Pastor Mike. Whatever you do, don't meet with Detective Martinez alone tomorrow. Wait for me. We'll go together." The drive home was a blur of worried thoughts. When he arrived, Jenna was already in bed, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. Michael changed quietly and slipped under the covers beside her, his mind racing. At 3 in the morning, his phone rang. Detective Martinez's voice was grim. "Pastor Thompson, you need to come to Memorial Park immediately." The park was a sea of flashing red and blue lights when Michael arrived. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the cold wind, and officers moved purposefully through the area. Detective Martinez met him at the perimeter, her face grave. "Emily Collins's body was found an hour ago by a jogger," she said without preamble. "She was murdered." The world tilted on its axis. "No," Michael breathed. "That's impossible. I just saw her." "When exactly did you last see her?" Martinez's tone shifted subtly, becoming more professional. "At the church, after the board meeting, around 8 o'clock. Did she mention meeting anyone? Going anywhere?" Michael hesitated, the USB drive burning in his pocket. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the night air. "Michael Thompson?" 2 officers approached, their expressions stern. "We need you to come with us to the station." The next few hours passed in a nightmare blur. Questions about his relationship with Emily, his whereabouts, the board meeting. Then came the evidence. Security footage showing his car near the park late last night, though he'd been home in bed. Emily's blood on his church office keys. A witness claiming to have seen them arguing violently. "This is insane," Michael protested. "I'm being framed." But as morning dawned, more evidence emerged. The murder weapon, a cross-shaped letter opener from his office, was found in a dumpster behind the church, his fingerprints clear on the handle, his DNA under Emily's fingernails, a series of threatening emails from his church account to hers, warning her to stop digging. Sarah arrived at the station still in her pajamas, her face wild with fear. "Dad, don't say another word. I'm calling Howard Chen from my firm. We need a criminal defense attorney." But even she fell silent when Detective Martinez played the security footage. There, clear as day, was a figure matching Michael's description following Emily into the park. The timestamp matched the estimated time of death. "That's not me," Michael insisted. "I was home with Jenna." "Mrs. Thompson has already been interviewed," Martinez said quietly. "She took a sleeping pill last night. She can't confirm your whereabouts after 9 p.m. The final blow came when officers searched Michael's home and found Emily's missing laptop hidden in his garage. On it, they discovered searches about untraceable poisons, body disposal methods, and the weakest points of the human neck. "Pastor Michael Thompson," Detective Martinez read formally, "you are under arrest for the murder of Emily Collins. You have the right to remain silent." As they led him out of the station in handcuffs, the morning news crews had already gathered. Flashbulbs popped as the respected pastor was paraded before the cameras. Through the chaos, he saw James Warren standing at the edge of the crowd, his face a mask of concerned citizenry. But when their eyes met, Warren's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a cold smile of triumph. The USB drive that might have explained everything was gone, disappeared from Michael's pocket sometime during the night of chaos, and with it vanished his last hope of proving his innocence. News of the arrest spread through Cedar Springs like wildfire. The beloved pastor, the murdered youth minister, drugs and corruption. It was the biggest scandal in town history. By nightfall, as Michael sat alone in his cell, his world had completely unraveled. Outside his window, he could hear protesters gathering, their angry chants calling for justice for Emily. In the coming days, more evidence would surface, each piece more damning than the last. The case against Michael Thompson was building, brick by brick, into an inescapable wall of guilt. And somewhere in Cedar Springs, the real killer walked free, protected by power, money, and carefully constructed lies. The stage was set for a battle that would test not just Michael's faith, but the very foundations of justice in Cedar Springs. And as the sun set on his first night in jail, he could only pray that the truth would somehow find its way into the light. The Cedar Springs County Courthouse stood imposing against the Texas sky, its limestone walls weathered by more than a century of seeking justice. Sarah Thompson stood at the defense table beside her father, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her notes. Despite her recent admission to the bar, she had insisted on being part of Michael's defense team, working alongside Howard Chen, a seasoned criminal defense attorney. "All rise," the bailiff's voice echoed through the packed courtroom, the Honorable Judge Margaret Blackwood presiding. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity. District Attorney Richard Hayes, a tall man with graying temples and calculating eyes, approached the jury with measured steps. Emily Collins was 23 years old, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. A devoted youth minister who dedicated her life to helping troubled teens. But when she uncovered corruption in her community, she paid for it with her life. The evidence will show that Michael Thompson, a man who presented himself as a shepherd of his flock, was nothing more than a wolf in sheep's clothing. Howard Chen's opening statement focused on Michael's 30 years of service to the community, his spotless record, and the circumstantial nature of the evidence. But even Sarah could see the jury's skeptical expressions. The local media had already tried and convicted her father in the court of public opinion. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 2 weeks. The forensic evidence seemed overwhelming. Michael's DNA under Emily's fingernails, his fingerprints on the murder weapon, the security footage showing someone of his build entering the park. The technical expert testified that the threatening emails came from his church computer, and the searches about murder methods were found on his home laptop. James Warren took the stand on the 3rd day, playing the role of the grieving mentor perfectly. Emily came to me the week before her death, he testified, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. She was concerned about Pastor Thompson's behavior. She said he had become controlling, angry about her investigations into the youth program. Sarah's cross-examination was fierce. Mr. Warren, isn't it true that you opposed Emily's investigations? That you tried to shut down her work multiple times? Objection, relevance, Hayes called out. Sustained, Judge Blackwood ruled. Counsel, stick to the facts of the case. The devastating blow came from Detective Martinez's testimony about the missing USB drive. We found evidence that Pastor Thompson destroyed it the night of the murder. Digital traces on Emily's laptop show she had compiled evidence of financial misconduct at the church, evidence she planned to present to the board. Sarah watched in horror as the prosecution twisted the truth, transforming her father from a devoted pastor into a manipulative killer trying to hide his financial crimes. Each piece of evidence seemed perfectly crafted to support this narrative. During a brief recess, Michael touched Sarah's arm. Sweetheart, I need you to stop. What? Dad, no. Warren's watching you too. Closely. The questions you're asking. I'm worried about your safety, about your mother and the babies. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can't just give up. We haven't even presented our defense yet. The defense's case felt weak in comparison. Character witnesses spoke of Michael's dedication to the community, but under cross-examination, many admitted they had seen changes in his behavior in the weeks before Emily's death. The alibi testimony from Jenna was undermined by the sleeping pill she had taken that night. Howard Chen called expert witnesses who questioned the reliability of the security footage and suggested the DNA evidence could have been transferred innocently during church activities. But the prosecution's rebuttal was ruthless, painting these alternatives as desperate attempts to explain away solid evidence. As the trial neared its end, Sarah made one last desperate attempt to introduce evidence about Warren Enterprises and the drug trafficking connection. Judge Blackwood shut it down immediately. Counsel, you will not use this courtroom to make unfounded accusations against respected members of the community. The prosecution's closing argument was masterful. Hayes wove together the evidence into a compelling narrative of betrayal and murder. Emily Collins trusted Michael Thompson, he concluded. She looked up to him as a spiritual leader, and when she discovered his crimes, he silenced her. The shepherd became the slaughterer. Howard Chen's closing focused on reasonable doubt, but Sarah could see the jury had already made up their minds. They had seen the evidence, heard the testimony, watched the security footage. The man they saw was not the father she knew, but a carefully constructed fiction created by Warren and his conspirators. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On the charge of first-degree murder, how do you find? We find the defendant, Michael Thompson, guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Sarah felt her knees buckle as Howard steadied her. Through her tears, she saw Warren in the gallery, his face a mask of somber satisfaction. Given the heinous nature of this crime, Judge Blackwood intoned, and the betrayal of both spiritual and community trust, I hereby sentence you to death by lethal injection. Michael stood stoically as the sentence was read, his faith visibly unshaken. I forgive those who have condemned me, he said quietly, and I pray that the truth will one day come to light. As the bailiffs led him away, Sarah caught a final glimpse of her father. Despite everything, his eyes held the same gentle strength she had known all her life. But now that strength would be tested behind bars, awaiting an execution date while his daughter fought to uncover the truth that had been so carefully buried. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the defense team. Through the chaos, Sarah noticed Detective Martinez standing apart from the crowd, a troubled expression on her face. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment Sarah saw a flicker of doubt in the detective's eyes. That night, as Sarah sat in her childhood home comforting her devastated mother, she made a silent vow. Warren and his conspirators had orchestrated a masterful frame-up, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had left a daughter with nothing left to lose, armed with a law degree and an unshakable belief in her father's innocence. The conviction had been won, but the real battle was just beginning. Somewhere in Cedar Springs, the truth about Emily's murder lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered. And Sarah Thompson was prepared to sacrifice everything to find it. The harsh fluorescent lights of Huntsville State Penitentiary's death row cast unforgiving shadows across Michael Thompson's face as he knelt in prayer. 3 months had passed since his conviction, and the stark reality of his new life had settled into a grim routine. The cell, barely 7 feet by 10 feet, had become both his sanctuary and his crucible. "Dear Heavenly Father," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the prison, "grant me strength to bear this burden and wisdom to understand your purpose." The sound of footsteps interrupted his devotion. "Thompson, you've got visitors," the guard announced. In the visitation room, separated by thick glass, sat Jenna and Sarah. His wife's pregnancy had progressed significantly. She was now 7 months along, her belly swollen with their twins. The sight of her made his heart ache with both love and regret. "Michael," Jenna pressed her hand against the glass, her eyes brimming with tears. "How are you holding up?" "I'm doing God's work even in here," he managed a small smile. "Started a Bible study group with some of the other inmates. You'd be amazed how many are seeking guidance." Sarah leaned forward, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights spent reviewing case files. "Dad, I've been looking into Warren's connections. There's something not right about the evidence. The timestamps on those security footage files—" "Sarah," Michael interrupted gently, "be careful. Warren has eyes everywhere. Remember what happened to Emily." The warning hung heavy in the air. They all knew the stakes. Emily's murder had been just the beginning. Warren's influence reached far deeper than any of them had imagined. Back in his cell, Michael found solace in ministering to his fellow inmates. Among them was Marcus Rodriguez, a former gang member facing execution for a drug-related homicide. "I don't understand you, preacher," Marcus said one evening during their Bible study. "How can you stay so calm knowing you're innocent? If it was me—" Michael looked at the young man thoughtfully. "Faith isn't just about believing when things are good, Marcus. It's about trusting God's plan even in our darkest moments." As the weeks passed, Michael's ministry on death row grew. Inmates who had once been hardened criminals began showing signs of transformation. The guards noticed the change in atmosphere, how the usual tension had been replaced by something approaching peace. Meanwhile, Jenna struggled to maintain normalcy at home. The church had appointed a new pastor, and former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The pregnancy was becoming more difficult, the stress taking its toll on her health. "Mrs. Thompson," her doctor had warned during her last checkup, "your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to reduce your stress levels for the baby's sake." But how could she find peace when her husband sat on death row, wrongly condemned, when their family name had been dragged through the mud, when even grocery shopping meant enduring whispers and pointed fingers? Sarah threw herself into investigating the case, working late into the night at her small law office. She had taken a leave of absence from her firm, using her savings to fund her private investigation. The wall of her office became a maze of connections, photos, and documents, all pointing toward Warren Enterprises. One evening, as she was reviewing security footage for the 100th time, a detail caught her eye. The timestamp showed a slight flicker, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Could the footage have been tampered with? She was so engrossed in her discovery that she didn't notice the dark car parked outside her office, didn't see the figure watching her through the window. Not until the brick came crashing through the glass, missing her head by inches. The note attached read, "Drop it or join Emily." On death row, Michael sensed the growing danger to his family. During their visits, he could see the toll it was taking on both Sarah and Jenna. His daughter's determination to prove his innocence was putting her in harm's way, while his wife's pregnancy was becoming increasingly risky. "Promise me something," he said to Sarah during one visit. "Promise me you'll protect yourself and your mother. The twins need their big sister." "I can't stop, Dad," Sarah's voice broke. I'm getting closer. The evidence doesn't add up. Warren's empire is built on drug money and Emily found proof. I just need more time. Time. The one thing they didn't have. The appeals process was moving forward, but each petition seemed to hit a wall. Judges who had connections to Warren, evidence that mysteriously disappeared, witnesses who suddenly changed their stories. In his cell, Michael began documenting everything in a journal. His observations, his prayers, the transformations he witnessed in his fellow inmates. If his execution wasn't stopped, at least there would be a record of the truth. One night, unable to sleep, he wrote, "The greatest test of faith is not in maintaining it when life is good, but in holding on to it when everything has been stripped away. In here, I've found that my purpose hasn't ended, it's evolved. Every soul touched, every life changed, is a miracle in itself." Marcus Rodriguez became his most devoted student, the young man's hard exterior crumbling as he embraced faith. "You know what's crazy, preacher?" he said one day. "I came in here guilty, accepting my punishment. You came in innocent, accepting it anyway. That's what got to me, that's what made me listen." The prison chaplain, Reverend Gates, noticed the change in the death row unit. "In 20 years of ministry here, I've never seen anything like it," he told Michael. "You've brought hope to a place designed to extinguish it." But even as Michael's spiritual influence grew, the clock was ticking. The appeals were running out. Warren's power seemed insurmountable, his web of corruption too intricate to unravel in time. Then came the news that would change everything. Jenna had been rushed to the hospital with severe preeclampsia. The twins were in danger, and doctors were considering an emergency C-section, despite her being only 7 months along. As Michael knelt in his cell that night, his prayer was different. "Lord," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, "I accept whatever fate you have planned for me, but please protect my family, save my babies, give Sarah the wisdom to know when to let go, and if it be your will, let the truth come to light." He didn't know it then, but his prayer was about to be answered in a way none of them could have anticipated. The darkest hour was approaching, but with it would come a divine revelation that would shake Cedar Springs to its core. Sarah Thompson sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by walls of evidence and connecting threads, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Loading dock. Warren Enterprises, midnight. Come alone if you want the truth about Emily." She hesitated, remembering the brick through her window, but desperation outweighed caution. With her mother in the hospital fighting for her life and the twins, and her father's execution date looming closer, she was running out of options. The loading dock was shrouded in shadows when she arrived. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates. Tom Martinez, Warren's head of security. "I can't live with this anymore," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "You saw what happened to Emily," Sarah stated, keeping her distance. Tom nodded, his face haggard with guilt. Warren ordered the hit. Emily had proof he was using the youth center renovation project to smuggle drugs. Construction materials came in clean, went out stuffed with product. She documented everything. The USB drive. Warren has it locked in his office safe, along with other evidence, the original security footage showing his son at the park that night, documents proving the forensics were tampered with. Tom's hands shook as he pulled out a small notebook. "I've written down everything, security codes, safe combination, where to find the evidence. But you have to understand, if Warren suspects I helped you..." A car engine roared to life nearby. Tom's eyes widened in panic. "Go! Now!" Sarah scrambled to her car just as headlights swept the area. As she drove away, she saw several dark figures converging on the loading dock in her rearview mirror. The next morning's news hit her like a physical blow. Warren Enterprises security chief found dead. Apparent suicide. Sarah knew it was no suicide. Tom had been silenced, but he'd given her the key to everything. The notebook contained detailed information about Warren's operation, including names of corrupt officials, drug routes, and most importantly, proof of her father's innocence. Detective Martinez was waiting outside Sarah's office when she arrived. "We need to talk," she said, her expression grave. "About Tom Martinez." Inside, Sarah studied the detective carefully. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I've been building a case against Warren for months," Martinez replied, pulling out a badge, FBI. "Tom was my informant. We're part of a task force investigating drug trafficking through Texas churches. Emily stumbled onto our investigation. The revelation shifted everything. Warren killed her to protect his operation." "Yes, but we need proof." "Tom said he gave you something." Sarah hesitated before pulling out the notebook. As they reviewed its contents together, A plan began to form. The FBI had been waiting for an opportunity to move on Warren, but needed concrete evidence. Now they had a way in, but time was against them. Michael's execution was scheduled for 48 hours later, and Jenna's condition was deteriorating. The twins were showing signs of distress, and doctors were preparing for an emergency delivery. "I can get into Warren's office," Sarah said, studying the security codes Tom had provided. "But we need a distraction." Martinez nodded. "Leave that to us. But Sarah, be careful. Warren's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." That night, as firefighters responded to a suspicious blaze at one of Warren's warehouses, Sarah slipped into the corporate offices. Following Tom's instructions, she found the safe hidden behind a painting in Warren's private office. Her hands trembled as she entered the combination. Inside, she found everything Tom had promised: the USB drive, original security footage, documents proving the evidence against her father had been fabricated. But there was more. Ledgers detailing bribes to judges, prosecutors, and police officials. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. A noise in the hallway froze her in place. Footsteps approached, measured, confident. Warren's voice drifted through the door. "I know you're in there, Sarah. Did you really think Tom's little notebook would be enough?" Her heart pounding, Sarah clutched the evidence to her chest. There was no way out except through the door where Warren waited. "Your father's execution is tomorrow," Warren continued. "Such a tragedy. And your poor mother struggling in the hospital. Stress is so dangerous during pregnancy." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah's mind raced, remembering Emily's fate, Tom's suicide. But she also thought of her father's unwavering faith, his courage in the face of injustice. She pressed the recording button on her phone, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Warren stood there, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. "Did you find what you were looking for? Why did you kill Emily?" Sarah asked directly, watching his reaction. Warren's smile was cold. "Emily was naive, like you. She thought she could play hero, expose the big bad wolf. Some battles aren't meant to be fought, Sarah. She found proof you were using the youth center to traffic drugs. A necessary evil. This town was dying before I built my empire. I employed hundreds, funded schools, churches. A few drugs? Small price for prosperity." Sarah's phone continued recording as Warren monologued, detailing his operation, Emily's murder, the frame-up of her father. His arrogance made him careless. He was so certain of his power that he never considered she might be wearing a wire. "So what now?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "Are you going to kill me too?" Warren stepped closer. Nothing so dramatic. A tragic car accident, perhaps. The grieving daughter unable to cope with her father's execution. The office door burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, led by Detective Martinez. Warren's face contorted in rage as he was read his rights, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Sarah rushed to the hospital with the evidence, where a judge was waiting. As her mother went into emergency surgery to deliver the twins, the judge signed a stay of execution. By morning, her father's conviction would be overturned. In his cell on death row, Michael received the news of Warren's arrest and his own vindication while on his knees in prayer. But his first thought was not of his freedom. It was of Jenna and their unborn children. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the night wasn't over. As doctors fought to save Jenna and the twins, Sarah held her father's proof of innocence in her hands, and Michael prayed in his cell. Their faith would face one final test. The truth had finally come to light, but at what cost? And would their family survive to see the dawn? In the dimly lit cell on death row, with only 24 hours remaining until his scheduled execution, Michael Thompson lay on his narrow bunk, his Bible open across his chest. The events of the day, Warren's arrest, Sarah's dangerous confrontation, and Jenna's emergency surgery, weighed heavily on his mind. Despite the stay of execution order, legal proceedings moved slowly and time was running out. "Lord," he whispered into the darkness, "give me strength." As midnight approached, the prison fell into its usual uneasy silence. Michael closed his eyes in prayer, his thoughts focused on Jenna and their unborn twins fighting for life in the hospital. Suddenly, the air in his cell seemed to shift, growing thick with an otherworldly presence. A brilliant light filled the small space, not harsh like the prison fluorescence, but warm and encompassing. In that moment, Michael experienced something beyond physical sight, a divine vision that transported him back to the night of Emily's murder. He saw the park with crystal clarity, but from a perspective he'd never witnessed before. Emily was there, clutching her laptop bag, nervousness evident in her stance. James Warren's son, Timothy, emerged from the shadows, his face contorted with drug-fueled rage. "You've ruined everything," Timothy's voice echoed in the vision. "Dad trusted you with the youth program and you betrayed him." Emily backed away, her voice steady despite her fear. "The kids deserve better than becoming addicts for your father's profit. I won't let this continue." The scene unfolded with terrible precision. Timothy lunged forward, grabbing Emily's throat. In the struggle, something fell from his pocket, a small bag of white powder. The cross-shaped letter opener, which Timothy had stolen from Michael's office days earlier, glinted in the streetlight before Michael jerked awake, gasping. The vision had shown him something only the killer could have known: the dropped drugs, the stolen letter opener, the exact words exchanged. Details that had never been made public. "Guard," he called out, his voice urgent. "I need to make a phone call." Officer Jenkins, one of the few guards who'd shown him kindness, approached his cell. "Thompson, it's past midnight." "Please," Michael pleaded, "it's about my case. I've seen something only the real killer would know." Jenkins studied him for a long moment before nodding. 5 minutes. In her apartment, surrounded by case files, Sarah answered her phone on the first ring. She'd been unable to sleep, waiting for news about her mother's surgery. "Sarah, listen carefully." Michael's voice was filled with an urgency she'd never heard before. "I've had a vision. Check the park's drainage grates near where Emily was found. Timothy Warren dropped drugs there during the struggle, and the letter opener. He stole it from my office 3 days before the murder. Security cameras in the church would show him taking it." Sarah's hands trembled as she took notes. "Dad, how could you know this?" "God has shown me the truth. Check the evidence list. They never found drugs at the scene, but they're there with Timothy's fingerprints and the church cameras. They were never checked because everyone assumed the letter opener was mine." Even as they spoke, Sarah was sending messages to Detective Martinez and her FBI team. Within hours, crime scene technicians were re-examining the park. They found exactly what Michael had described: a small bag of cocaine wedged in the drainage grate, preserved from the elements, bearing Timothy Warren's fingerprints. The church's security footage, subpoenaed but never reviewed, clearly showed Timothy Warren stealing the letter opener from Michael's office 3 days before the murder. When confronted with this evidence, combined with his father's arrest and recorded confession, Timothy Warren broke down. "Emily threatened to expose everything," he confessed through tears. "Dad's drug operation, my addiction, all of it. She said she had proof on her laptop. I just wanted to scare her, make her give me the evidence. I didn't mean to." As dawn broke over Cedar Springs, 2 major events occurred simultaneously. In the hospital after a difficult surgery, Jenna Thompson gave birth to healthy twin girls. And in the courthouse, a judge signed orders for Michael's immediate release, citing overwhelming new evidence of his innocence. Michael fell to his knees in his cell when he received the news, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me the truth." News of the divine vision spread quickly through the prison. Inmates who had attended Michael's Bible study saw it as confirmation of their growing faith. Even the most hardened skeptics couldn't explain how he had known details only the killer could have known. Marcus Rodriguez, who had watched Michael maintain his faith through the darkest times, was particularly moved. "God worked a miracle through you, preacher," he said during their final Bible study together. "You never lost faith and he never abandoned you." As Michael was processed for release, he made a final request to visit death row. Standing before his former cell block, he offered a prayer for those he was leaving behind. "Let my story be a testament to your power," he prayed. "Let it bring hope to those who have lost their way." The morning sun was rising over Cedar Springs as Michael walked out of the prison gates, where Sarah waited to drive him to the hospital. The town was already buzzing with the news of Warren's drug empire, Timothy's confession, and the miraculous vision that had revealed the truth. But Michael's thoughts were focused solely on reaching Jenna and meeting his newborn daughters. God had not only preserved his life, but had blessed him with new life, a symbol of hope and renewal after the darkness. As they drove to the hospital, Sarah glanced at her father. "Do you think people will believe it was really a divine vision?" Michael smiled, peace evident in his expression. "Some will, some won't, but faith isn't about convincing others. It's about trusting God's plan, even in our darkest moments." The vision had done more than save Michael's life. It had exposed corruption, brought justice for Emily, and would ultimately lead to a profound transformation in Cedar Springs. But its greatest impact was yet to be seen. as the story of the pastor's unwavering faith and divine revelation would touch hearts and change lives far beyond the small Texas town. The next 48 hours in Cedar Springs unfolded at a dizzying pace. Sarah Thompson raced between the hospital, courthouse, and FBI headquarters, fighting to save her father's life. Her mother, Jenna, lay in critical condition following the birth of the twins, adding another layer of urgency to their desperate situation. At the Cedar Springs Police Department, Detective Martinez led the interrogation of Timothy Warren. The young man, now in withdrawal from cocaine, crumbled under questioning. "I never meant to kill her," Timothy repeated, his hands shaking. "Dad said Emily was threatening everything we'd built. He told me to scare her, get the evidence she'd collected. But when I confronted her," his voice broke. "She wouldn't back down. She just kept talking about the kids, about how many lives we were destroying." Meanwhile, in his holding cell, James Warren maintained his composure, even as his empire crumbled. FBI agents had seized computers and documents from Warren Enterprises, uncovering a drug trafficking operation that spanned 3 states. The youth center renovation project had been the perfect cover, construction materials arriving filled with drugs, leaving clean after distribution. Sarah worked with the FBI to piece together the timeline. Emily had discovered the operation while reviewing financial records for her youth program. She documented everything meticulously: shipping manifests, financial transfers, even photographs of the construction sites where drugs were being moved. "The USB drive proves everything," Sarah explained to the federal prosecutor. "Warren wasn't just trafficking drugs. He controlled the entire local justice system, judges, prosecutors, even some law enforcement, all on his payroll." But bureaucracy moved slowly, and Michael's execution was still officially scheduled. The stay of execution needed to be processed through multiple departments, each potentially harboring Warren's corrupt allies. At the hospital, Jenna remained unconscious, her body struggling to recover from the emergency C-section. The twin girls, named Faith and Grace, fought for life in the NICU. Michael, still in his cell, could only pray for his family's survival. Sarah hadn't slept in 36 hours when she received an urgent call from Detective Martinez. "We have a problem." The detective's voice was tense. "Someone's trying to expedite your father's execution. They're claiming the stay order was filed incorrectly." Warren's people in the system, Sarah realized, her exhaustion vanishing. "They're trying to kill him before the truth comes out." "Exactly, and there's more. Timothy Warren was found unconscious in his cell. Apparent suicide attempt, but..." Sarah's blood ran cold. "They're cleaning house." The race intensified. Sarah and Martinez worked with FBI agents to identify and neutralize Warren's corrupted officials. Each hour revealed new layers of corruption, new threats to Michael's life. In the prison, Michael sensed the spiritual battle raging around him. During his morning prayer, he felt the same divine presence that had granted him the vision. "Lord," he prayed, "let your truth prevail." As if in answer, Timothy Warren regained consciousness in the hospital. But instead of sticking to his father's script, he asked to make a full confession, not just about Emily's murder, but about everything he knew regarding his father's operation. "I can't live with this anymore," Timothy told Sarah when she arrived at his hospital room. "Emily was right about everything. She died trying to protect those kids, and your father nearly died because of our sins." Timothy's testimony proved crucial. His detailed account of the murder, matching exactly with Michael's divine vision, convinced even the most skeptical officials. More importantly, he provided names, every judge, prosecutor, and officer on his father's payroll. In the courthouse, Sarah fought through legal bureaucracy, racing to ensure the stay of execution would hold. Judge Sandra Martinez, one of the few judges not implicated in Warren's conspiracy, worked through the night to expedite the official orders. "This is one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice I've ever seen," Judge Martinez declared as she signed the final documents. "Your father's conviction is vacated, effective immediately." With 12 hours remaining until the scheduled execution, Sarah drove to Huntsville prison, the papers clutched in her hand. But Warren had one final card to play. The prison warden, another of Warren's allies, claimed he hadn't received the official communication. Without direct orders from the governor's office, the execution proceeds as scheduled. Sarah's heart raced as she called Detective Martinez. The FBI team mobilized, reaching out to the governor's office directly. Minutes ticked by like hours as they waited for a response. In his cell, Michael remained calm, continuing to minister to his fellow inmates. "Even in our darkest moments," he told them, "God's light can shine through." With 6 hours remaining, the governor's office finally responded. State troopers arrived at the prison with executive orders to halt the execution and release Michael Thompson immediately. The warden, faced with overwhelming authority and evidence of his own corruption, finally relented. As Michael walked free, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, a powerful symbol of truth emerging from darkness. Sarah drove her father directly to the hospital, where more miracles awaited. Jenna had regained consciousness, and doctors had just moved the twins out of critical care. As Michael held his daughters for the first time, tears streaming down his face, the full impact of God's intervention became clear. "Faith and grace," he whispered, cradling the tiny babies. Perfect names for God's perfect timing. The 48 hours that had begun with a divine vision ended with a family reunited, justice restored, and a community forever changed. But the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Warren's drug empire had been exposed, but the healing process for Cedar Springs was just starting. The truth about Emily's murder had come to light, but her legacy of protecting vulnerable youth still needed to be honored. As Michael held his family close in the hospital room, he knew that God had preserved his life for a purpose. The real work, rebuilding trust, healing wounds, and leading his community back to faith, lay ahead. The race against time had been won, but the journey of redemption was just beginning. Dawn broke over Cedar Springs as James Warren sat in his prison cell, his perfectly tailored suit replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The local news played on a small television outside his cell, broadcasting the story of Michael Thompson's miraculous exoneration and Warren's own spectacular fall from grace. Warren Enterprises CEO indicted on multiple charges, the headline scrolled across the screen. Drug trafficking ring exposed through pastor's divine vision. Warren's carefully constructed facade had finally cracked. As he watched the news coverage, his mind wandered to the moment everything began to unravel. Emily Collins's determined face as she presented her findings about the youth center project. He had underestimated her then, just as he had underestimated the Thompson family's resilience. In his solitary cell, Warren's conscience began to weigh heavily on him. The faces of young lives destroyed by his drug operation haunted his sleepless nights. Emily's death, Timothy's downfall, the corruption of countless officials, all of it traced back to his choices. Meanwhile, at Cedar Springs Memorial Hospital, Michael Thompson cradled his newborn daughters while Jenna rested. Sarah sat nearby, dark circles under her eyes testament to her relentless fight for justice. "Faith and grace," Michael whispered to the twins, born in the darkness, but destined for light. A knock at the door interrupted the peaceful moment. Detective Martinez entered, her expression serious. "Sorry to disturb you, but something's happened. James Warren is asking to make a public confession." The news spread quickly through Cedar Springs. Warren had requested a press conference, promising to reveal everything. The town's attention focused on the county jail as reporters gathered outside, waiting for the man who had once been their most respected citizen to tell his story. Warren stood before the cameras, his usual confidence replaced by a haunted look. "I've witnessed something I cannot explain," he began, his voice trembling. "A man I wrongly condemned received a vision from God, a vision that exposed the truth I tried so desperately to hide." He continued, detailing the entire operation, how it began with small compromises, grew into a massive drug trafficking network, and ultimately led to murder. He spoke about Emily's discovery, Timothy's addiction, and the elaborate frame-up of Michael Thompson. "The night Emily died," Warren revealed, "she came to me first hoping I would help stop the drug trade. She believed in redemption, believed I would choose to do the right thing. Instead, I chose power and profit over human lives." As Warren spoke, Michael watched from the hospital room, holding his daughters close. The confession brought no joy, only a deep sadness for the lives destroyed by greed and corruption. At the prison, Timothy Warren watched his father's confession with tears streaming down his face. His own testimony had helped expose the truth, but the weight of Emily's death still haunted him. Cedar Springs began the painful process of healing. The church board convened an emergency meeting, unanimously voting to reinstate Michael as senior pastor. The youth center, once a front for drug trafficking, would be reformed as the Emily Collins Memorial Youth Center, dedicated to helping young people overcome addiction. Warren's confession had far-reaching consequences. Law enforcement officials in 3 states began dismantling the drug network. Corrupt judges and prosecutors faced indictments. The system that had nearly executed an innocent man was being purged of its corruption. 1 week after Warren's confession, Michael stood before his congregation for the first time since his arrest. The church was packed, with even former skeptics returning to hear him speak. "Today's scripture comes from Isaiah," he began, his voice strong despite all he had endured. "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow." He spoke about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of truth to overcome darkness. As he shared his vision and the miraculous events that followed, many in the congregation wept openly. "Emily Collins died fighting for the truth," Michael continued. "She believed in the power of light to overcome darkness, in the ability of love to transform lives. Her sacrifice and God's divine intervention have given us a second chance. How will we use it?" The impact of Warren's confession and Michael's return rippled through the community. Former addicts came forward seeking help. Families torn apart by drugs began healing. The youth center, under new leadership, became a beacon of hope. Sarah established a legal clinic dedicated to reviewing potential wrongful convictions. Her experience fighting for her father had shown her how easily justice could be corrupted and how important it was to fight for truth. Jenna recovered fully and the twins grew stronger each day. They became a symbol of new beginnings for Cedar Springs, their names Faith and Grace, reflecting the qualities that had brought healing to a wounded community. James Warren and his son Timothy faced justice for their crimes, but their confession and remorse opened the door for redemption. Michael visited them both in prison, offering forgiveness and hope for transformation. The moment of truth had come at great cost, but its impact continued to spread. Cedar Springs would never be the same, but perhaps that was God's plan all along. Through one man's unwavering faith, a divine vision, and the courage of those who fought for truth, a community had been transformed. As Michael held his Sunday services, now with Jenna and the twins in the front row and Sarah beside them, he knew that the story of Cedar Springs would be told for generations, a testament to the power of faith, the triumph of truth, and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest of circumstances. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating the congregation as they sang hymns of praise. In that light, Michael could see Emily's legacy living on, in the reformed lives, the renewed faith, and the restored justice that her sacrifice had helped bring about. The moment of truth had indeed changed everything, but it was only the beginning of a greater story of redemption and renewal. 1 year after Michael Thompson's release, Cedar Springs had undergone a remarkable transformation. The Emily Collins Memorial Youth Center stood as a beacon of hope, its walls adorned with colorful murals painted by local youth, many of them former addicts who had found redemption through the center's programs. Michael walked through the center's halls, pausing to admire a particular mural depicting Emily's smiling face, surrounded by symbols of hope and renewal. Twin girls, now 1 year old, toddled beside him, holding onto his fingers. Faith and Grace had grown into happy, healthy children, their presence a daily reminder of God's grace during the darkest times. "Pastor Mike," a familiar voice called out. Marcus Rodriguez, recently released from death row after his sentence was commuted, approached with a broad smile. Following Michael's example, he had become a mentor at the youth center, using his own experience to guide troubled teens away from drugs and violence. "The new program is making a real difference," Marcus reported. 10 more kids enrolled this week. They're actually listening, you know. When we tell them our stories, they see the truth." Michael nodded, watching a group of teenagers gathered in the recreation area. Where Warren's drug operation had once preyed on young lives, hope now flourished. The transformation hadn't been easy. The town had struggled with the aftermath of Warren's confession, as families confronted the reality of addiction and corruption that had infected their community. Sarah had established the Truth and Justice Legal Clinic, working tirelessly to review other potential wrongful convictions. Her experience fighting for her father had revealed systemic problems that extended far beyond Cedar Springs. Already, 3 other convictions had been overturned, and more cases were under review. In her office at the clinic, Sarah kept a photo of Emily Collins on her desk. "She died fighting for truth," Sarah often told her staff. "Our work honors her sacrifice." Jenna had recovered fully and thrown herself into supporting the youth center's families. Her own experience of nearly losing everything had given her a unique ability to connect with mothers struggling to save their children from addiction. The support group she founded became a vital resource for families in crisis. James Warren and his son Timothy remained in prison, but their story had taken an unexpected turn. Through regular visits with Michael, Both men had experienced profound spiritual transformations. Warren used his business expertise to develop rehabilitation programs for inmates, while Timothy counseled young addicts, sharing his cautionary tale. The church itself had been reborn. Michael's congregation had grown not just in numbers but in purpose. The Sunday services now attracted people from all walks of life. Former addicts sitting beside business leaders, ex-convicts worshipping alongside law enforcement officers. The message of redemption and renewal resonated deeply in a community that had witnessed its power firsthand. On this particular morning, Michael prepared to officiate a special service. The youth center was celebrating its first anniversary, and the community had gathered to remember Emily and celebrate the changes her sacrifice had inspired. Emily saw the truth when others turned away, Michael began, addressing the packed auditorium. She believed in the power of light to overcome darkness, in the possibility of redemption for everyone, even those who seemed lost to corruption and addiction. He gestured to the wall of photographs, smiling faces of young people who had found healing through the center's programs. Each of these stories is a miracle. Each represents a life transformed, a family restored, a future reclaimed from darkness. Detective Martinez, now head of a specialized anti-corruption unit, sat in the audience. Her investigation had expanded beyond Cedar Springs, uncovering and dismantling similar drug operations in other communities. The model of rehabilitation and renewal pioneered in Cedar Springs was being studied and replicated across the state. 1 year ago, Michael continued, our community stood divided by suspicion and corrupted by greed. Today, we stand united in purpose, committed to carrying forward Emily's vision of hope and redemption. As if to emphasize his words, Faith and Grace toddled down the aisle, their mother following close behind. The twins had become beloved symbols of new beginnings in Cedar Springs. Their names, chosen in the darkest hours of crisis, now seemed prophetic. Faith to believe in transformation, Grace to extend forgiveness and healing. The service concluded with the dedication of a new wing of the youth center, a residential rehabilitation facility that would allow the center to help even more young people escape addiction. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was performed by a group of program graduates, their clear eyes and confident smiles testament to the possibility of change. As the community celebrated afterward, Michael found a quiet moment to visit Emily's memorial garden. The peaceful space, filled with flowers and scripture verses, had become a place of reflection and healing. You would be proud, he whispered, touching the bronze plaque that bore her name. Your courage broke the chains of corruption and addiction that bound our community. Your sacrifice opened the door for countless miracles of redemption. A soft breeze stirred the flowers, and Michael felt that familiar divine presence, the same that had granted him the vision in his prison cell. He understood now that his own trial had been part of a larger plan, a catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond his personal vindication. As he walked back to join his family, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The darkness had been deep, but the light that emerged was brighter than anyone could have imagined. Cedar Springs had become a testimony to the power of faith, the triumph of truth, and the endless possibility of renewal. The story wasn't over. It never really would be. Each day brought new challenges, new souls seeking redemption, new opportunities to demonstrate the transformative power of love and truth. But now the community faced these challenges together, strengthened by their shared journey from darkness to light. Faith and Grace ran to meet him, their laughter echoing through the halls of the youth center. In their innocent joy, Michael saw the future of Cedar Springs, a future built on truth, sustained by faith, and continually renewed by grace. The redemption of Cedar Springs was more than just a story of justice restored or evil exposed. It was a living testament to the power of unwavering faith, the strength of determined love, and the endless possibility of renewal when truth and grace work together to transform lives. If this story of faith, justice, and divine intervention touched your heart, please share your thoughts below. What moment resonated most with you? Michael's unwavering faith, Sarah's determined fight for justice, or the community's transformation? Your comments inspire others and remind us that with faith, even the darkest moments can lead to miraculous breakthroughs. Don't forget to like and share this powerful testimony of God's perfect timing.